Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IoT For All Podcast, the #1 publication and resource for the Internet of Things. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon. If you are watching this on YouTube, we would truly appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you have not done so already. Today's episode is a good one. We have two guests from EDJX. We have the CEO, Benjamin Thomas, and Delano Seymour, the CTO, on here to talk about a number of fantastic topics. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with EDJX, they are an intelligent edge operating system and computing platform that makes it easy to write, deploy, and execute applications using serverless computing to increase responsiveness and security. So we talk about a number of different topics here. We talk about mesh compute, storage role, why it matters. We talk about what serverless IoT is, why it's important, how serverless at the edge is shaping the future of computing and the Internet of Things industry, benefits from that applications can get from being serverless at the edge, and major challenges we're seeing in the space and the current landscape kind of going forward when it comes to platform tools and things like that. So all in all, great conversation. At the end of it, we dive into biggest growth drivers in the space. So you definitely don't want to miss that. But yeah, overall, fantastic conversation with both Benjamin and Delano. I really implore you to listen to the whole thing. I think you get a lot of value out of it. But before we get into it, any of you out there are looking to enter the fast-growing and profitable IoT market, but don't know where to start? Check out our sponsor, Leverage. Leverage's IoT solutions development platform provides everything you need to create turnkey IoT products that you can white label and resell under your own brand. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT For All podcast. Benjamin, Delano, thank you both so much for taking time today to be on the IoT For All podcast. Welcome to have you.
Great to be here, Ryan.
And it's great to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And obviously, Benjamin, this is your second appearance on one of our shows, so welcome back. And let's go ahead and start off by having you both do a quick introduction about yourself and give any kind of background information you think will be relevant to our audience. Benjamin, we'll start with you, and then Delano, we'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. My name is Benjamin Thomas. I'm the CEO of EDJX, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. And I joined the company a few months ago, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Great to have you.
Yes, and my name is Delano Seymour, and I am the CTO of EDJX. Been involved in a lot of different startups, so I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have both of you. I would love it if perhaps, Benjamin, you wouldn't mind giving a quick overview of the company, kind of the role you all play in the space, talk about kind of the story behind the company, just kind of at a high level, just to catch our audience up if they may be unfamiliar.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ryan. EDJX is an intelligent edge operating system that makes it easy to write, deploy, and execute applications using serverless technology to increase responsiveness, security to the edge. And so what we have is an edge mesh network of microcompute and storage nodes that really provide compute and storage in a mesh network that can be in the data center or at the far edge, and enables companies to deploy IoT sensors, accelerate content, and build applications very quickly.
Fantastic. And do you all have a focus from a target industry standpoint or use cases that you kind of mainly are kind of operating in, or is it much more kind of horizontal and you kind of agnostic to all that?
Well, we're a platform, so we can work across any industry.
Right.
What we're seeing right now is anything moving, anything remote outside of cities, anything that is very sensor heavy.
Sure.
That seems to be where we're getting the most traction.
Fantastic. And you mentioned kind of mesh computing, and I thought maybe I could throw it over to Delano for a second and just talk about what exactly that is and what role does it play in the IoT space? Why does it matter? Why should people pay attention to it? And kind of just go from there.
All right. So mesh compute is our way of delivering on something that we're probably kind of familiar with. Mm-hmm. You had mesh networks in the past, and in a mesh network, you'll have many different wireless access points that work together to create a network in a surrounding area. But we do something very, very similar. We take compute and we deliver compute in exactly the same way. We have many nodes that span the globe in different areas, and they talk to each other independently in a decentralized way. And therefore, we can provide a compute platform that is across the area that you live or wherever you are.
And at a high level, can you talk about kind of the benefit and value of doing that?
Well, so some of the benefits of doing that is, one, you get a node or a server or compute unit close to you. You'll be able to compute on that node as you move from one state to another state. It moves with you. It's like that follow the sun idea. Also, our developers can write code once and have that code delivered globally. So their code can be used anywhere and everywhere in the world.
Fantastic. And the other topic that Benjamin mentioned, serverless, and talking about kind of serverless IoT, which I know was a conversation Benjamin and I had before in our previous conversation. But from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about, first at a high level, what it actually means, serverless and serverless IoT, and why it's important, and kind of like as we were talking about mesh compute here?
Yes. So serverless, of course, has servers, but the serverless part of that nomenclature is for the developer themselves. They don't have to deal with or think about or configure any servers. All of those servers are something that we take care of and our platform takes care of. Now, we've done it in a way where our platform takes care of that in an autonomous way.
Okay.
So we don't have a lot of people running around adding new servers to the network. It's all autonomous. And each of those nodes in our network talk to each other on a peer-to-peer network. So they can communicate from node to deliver that service to you.
Fantastic. And Benjamin, let me ask you from your side of things, as you look at the market and the current state of IoT, how does serverless kind of at the edge how do you see it shaping the future of IoT, kind of, and the computing that's being done there, and just from a general sense?
Well, look, I mean, I think the IoT industry is very much focused on serverless because you think about you're putting an appliance or a sensor or something on the edge, and that's a lot to think about already. And so, if you can reduce the complexity of your stack by using serverless technology, where you're not having to think about virtual machines or Kubernetes or the scaling piece of it. I think that's why the IoT industry has adopted serverless for the most part as their platform of choice. But of course, not all serverless platforms are built the same way. But certainly, I think the IoT industry has embraced serverless in a big way. Just because they're already doing something hard. They've got something moving around. It's a drone or driverless cars or sensors that are in weird locations. And so it's already pretty complex. And so making the stack overall easier to manage with fewer people is something that reduces the risk of IoT implementations.
Yeah, and kind of tag on to that, I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit more on kind of the benefits of building applications using serverless at the edge computing. You kind of just hinted at one there at the end of that kind of statement, but just generally speaking, what are the other benefits that people should be thinking about when it comes to utilizing and implementing this technology?
Well, a big benefit is simply reducing the number of people required to maintain the application. And so, if you think about the traditional way that software has been built, you start with a server, right? It could be a physical server, it could be a virtual machine. And then you start thinking about, okay, what's our database stack? What's our middleware stack? And there's a lot of choices that have to be made to develop software. And so it just adds to the complexity. You need more people to manage the application. And you also pay for that server, whether you're using it or not. And so there's some costs built in there too. And so I think that it's really about reduction in the DevOps maintenance team, as well as paying for what you use instead of paying for a whole infrastructure that may or may not get a lot of traffic.
Sure. And how does your all's offering kind of fit into the current landscape of of these platforms and tools, and kind of how does it differentiate, and what are the, how should people kind of view it and as it currently stands?
Well, look, I think a big differentiator is what Delano alluded to earlier, which is we're a peer-to-peer architecture.
Right.
And so why does that matter? It matters because IoT is at the edge by definition. And so if a serverless platform is built in a very centralized way, then you may not have the best response, the fastest response. You may not have the flexibility of being able to connect, for instance, your sensor directly to the compute node. And so the peer-to-peer aspect is also important because the edge is a messy place. It could be on a tower, it could be on a rooftop, it could be on a street corner, in a traffic control box. And these are places that are not necessarily temperature controlled. They're subject to the elements. And so it requires a different way of handling it to make sure that those computers stay up, or more importantly, your application stays up in the event of an accident or lightning strike or drunk driver or whatever else knocks out the actual box.
Right.
And so that's a different architecture entirely from traditional centralized systems that really rely on protected data center environments that are temperature controlled, that have access to the data center with badges, and they achieve security and through very traditional centralized methods. And
Absolutely.
So it's a totally different architecture that frankly enables use cases that that people are just now starting to realize are available.
And what are some of those use cases, if you mind following up on that?
Well, sure. I mean, think about a drone. I mean, a drone is a flying object that that by definition is communicating over the air.
Right.
And so anytime you're communicating over the air, there's latency involved. And so as the drone flies away from the data center location, the latency will go up. It's just linear.
Sure.
And so, you think about to achieve, something that's other than line of sight for a drone, that requires a network of nodes that span outside of the data center in a whole city, for instance.
Sure.
And so that's one example of where, you have a latency over-the-air communication that needs to be managed through a mesh network of compute and storage.
Fantastic. Well, I wanted to throw it back over to Delano real quick. And from the tech side of things, the developer side of things in the IoT space, and pivot and talk about the major challenges that you all have seen developers really face in the space, and kind of advice you have for overcoming those challenges. Again, from more of the technical perspective that developers are kind of working in every day.
Well, most developers have to write their code and then deploy that code somewhere. That deployment option takes time.
Sure.
You might have to write deployment code. And of course, you have to think about your system being online no matter what happens, whether you get a burst of customers, whether something else, like a bug or something else, comes into your system. Well, we can sort of help to take away some of those problems.
Sure.
By removing the need even to do deployment. The deployment's very quick, very simple. It's basically just a click away. Also, the maintenance of the system's autonomous. So because that system is autonomous, you can rest assured that your code will be available and online and secured without you having to worry about it.
And from your perspective, I know I kind of asked this question already to Benjamin, but from the technical perspective, and as more of the technical audience watches this or listens to this episode, one of the questions I'm sure they're going to have is how what you all have really differs from existing serverless platforms, and kind of what you feel is kind of your secret sauce that you're obviously willing to publicly talk about, and really what separates you out from maybe other platforms out there. Not so much like in a sales pitchy way, but just out of curiosity, kind of what's unique about what you all have built and kind of your approach more on the technical side of things.
Right. So I would say the biggest thing is what we call EdgeNet.
Okay.
Um, we call it EdgeNet because it's a network that spans all of the different nodes across the world, right? And
Sure.
each of these nodes communicate with each other, not necessarily with a centralized system. So whenever someone does something as simple as upload a file,
Mm,
we can then take that file and break it down into blocks and
okay.
then push those blocks to one node. And then
Sure.
that node gossips to all of the other nodes and says, hey, we have a block. Do you guys have a copy? Do you need a copy?
Right.
And it can then deliver that block to all the nodes that request it. And then as people are trying to access that data, let's say you're in India on one week and then you're in Bermuda on the next week, the nerds in India could talk to the nerds in Bermuda and say, hey, I have this person who's requesting a particular piece of data. Please send me that data. Send me a copy of that data. Well, in a centralized way or a centralized serverless
Mm,
system, all of the data is generally in one geographic location. And therefore, yes, it makes it easy to move data around in that data center. But what
right.
about when I move from one country to another country and halfway around the world,
Of course.
right? How do I get that data over to that country in a way that's fast and my
Mm,
latency doesn't get um, sort of abused or my latency is still high, right?
right.
So that's some of the main advantages of using an edge platform, edge computing platform.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. Benjamin, let me ask you this. It's a little bit higher level question, but from your perspective, what are some of the biggest drivers of growth, not just for you all as a company, but also that you're seeing take place in the IoT space when it comes to adoption and adoption of these types of kind of edge computing serverless platforms, but at the same time, like just generally IoT technologies and solutions. What are you seeing as some of the biggest drivers of growth? And kind of break that down even further, what are some of the biggest drivers that relate directly to what you all do that's really helping drive things forward as a company?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we have a statement that we've started to incorporate when we talk to people. When is late wrong?
Mm,
And what I mean by that is late is wrong when you're dealing with things like Vision Zero, which is reducing traffic fatalities.
sure.
And you need your sensor on the edge to have very fast response time and be able to react to changing conditions in front of the sensor. And so, when we're working with a client right now that's developing a very advanced gunshot detection system,
Hmm.
and currently late is very wrong because
Yeah. Right.
someone will, you know, get shot at, and that data is analyzed, and 2 months later, they can tell you, what kind of weapon fired from what
Hmm.
direction.
Hmm.
Well, late is very wrong because that you can't bring that person back from the dead. And
Right.
so, if we can do real-time analytics at the edge, uh, that is a hugely important development, not only for safety, but also just for communication with moving things. And
Mm,
so you think about driverless cars. Late is very wrong. A car
right.
can crash, a person could die because you don't have real-time, on-the-fly analysis
Sure.
of the sensor data, the environmental data, the fact that a light changed, that maybe was on a remote control with an emergency responder. Those are the kinds of things where late is very wrong, and late
Mm,
could equal death or could equal destruction of
right.
property.
Right.
And so, what we see is peer-to-peer edge networking and mesh computing really opens up a whole new ability. When we go to conferences and we look at the tools available right now for intelligent infrastructure, what have you, most of those tools are looking back. They look
Mm,
at data, they
right.
analyze it, they bring it to the cloud, and then they tell you, um, here's what we could have done better. I think the future applications are actually going to do real-time analytics, real-time processing, and give the answers in real time. And
Yeah.
this has to happen very quickly. The human eye can see 150 milliseconds. That's when we think it's good, and a website's fast enough at 150 milliseconds.
Mm,
But machines operate in terms of sometimes single digit milliseconds.
right.
And whether it's a heavy sensor that's putting off a lot of data that has to be analyzed very quickly,
Sure.
or whether it's a machine to machine or mobility application from vehicle to cell phone tower. These are very fast transactions. And so, that's really where we start to shine, is when late is wrong and we need low latency real-time analysis.
And how do you kind of see this space evolving, kind of in the coming months to years? You kind of talked a little bit there about some future things that could possibly happen, but where do you, from your all's perspective, where do you see this space going? It seems like a very rapidly growing space and becoming more and more important every day to enable a lot of these use cases that we're talking about now. But just from a general sense, where do you kind of see the evolution of the space, and what are you most excited for when it comes to these technologies?
Well, I think a big driver is just the IoT spending.
Hmm.
When we looked at the market and frankly, IoT is expected to be $500 billion globally in the next 3 to 4 years.
Right.
And it's interesting because edge computing is actually growing, at 50% a year. It's going to go from $6.5 billion last year to almost 90 billion in a few years.
Right.
And so what's really driving that is IoT is very much an edge use case overall. Not all IoT, but a big chunk of it is something at the edge, kicking off data, something moving, like we said earlier, with cars moving around that don't have an operator. Their operator is a computer, for instance. And so we see a lot of brand new things that we're running into new use cases every single day. But when you look at IoT spending that's exploding, and also edge computing that's exploding even faster, that should tell you that the demand for edge computing is really being driven by IoT.
Sure. I completely agree with you. It's I've heard very similar sentiments from a lot of the other experts I've interviewed, but not too many of them are as close to this as you are. Nor are they building an edge computing serverless platform. But there definitely seems to be a lot of agreement that this is the future that the industry is heading. It seems like you guys are in a very good spot to take advantage of that growth that we all see is projected in the industry, which makes it even more exciting. As before we wrap up here, I wanted to ask Delano, on the technical side, when you work with developers, how do developers kind of approach, or how do you all approach the onboarding process of developers? And for those listening, how can they learn about that process and potentially explore your all's offerings and kind of get in touch there?
Yeah, so what we do, we help developers to first realize that what they're doing with EDJX is very similar to what they're used to doing in a cloud platform.
Okay.
But the back end, the stuff in the back is what's different. So onboarding with EDJX is very simple. I mean, we have a nice website. You can go to that website. You can click the sign up button and create an account. Once you got an account, you're basically ready to go. We have documentation on our website as well, which takes you through the steps of creating that first serverless function, for instance, and compiling that code down to WASM. We use WebAssembly in how we deliver the serverless compute, and then uploading that WASM to our platform. Very simple. It's like uploading a file to a bucket in any other storage facility. Very simple, right? And once they upload that file is now ready to be used everywhere and anywhere on the planet. And so the onboarding process is very, very simple. And we hope that it's very easy for all our developers to take on.
That's awesome. Benjamin, on from a more general sense, our audience out there who wants to follow up, ask questions, learn more about what you have going on, what's the best way for them to engage with you and connect?
Well, we recently updated our website. It's edjx.io, EDJX.io, and we have very detailed product descriptions and service descriptions. We have forms where if somebody wants to, for instance, host a sensor, they can fill out a form and we'll do our best to accommodate them. We've really worked hard over the last several years forming relationships with tower companies, rooftop companies, traffic box companies. And so really we can get things put up in almost any location.
Yep.
And so what we're seeing now is that we're being asked to retool some older tools to the platform.
Sure.
And to take advantage of the capabilities, and we have partners that can help with that. We're not a software development shop from the standpoint of, we don't have a system integration team that helps port applications over, but we do have very good partners that do that every day in and day out that we're working with, and we can make that easy for the customers as well.
That's awesome. Very good. How was, by the way, I wanted to ask you before I let you go here, how was, you guys just recently were at an event from, I understand, with the ITS World Congress. How was that? How events kind of been? I haven't been to any personally. I know we've had some members of the team attend some that have been really successful, but how's it been for you all?
Well, look, we were at ITS World Congress last week in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I think it was over 10,000 people from all over the world.
Okay.
Japan, Korea, Taiwan, I mean, everywhere. And we had a great time there. People were showcasing their applications that they've been working on for driverless cars, for LiDAR, all the latest and greatest technologies for traffic safety. And man, we had a panel that we stood on with Michelin. They make tires and they rank restaurants, but they actually also have their own software. And so that was standing room only in that particular panel. We just had a great time, and honestly, we're really just excited to follow up with everybody. And the eyes were starting to open around multi-tenancy. For one thing, right? These municipalities and states have been putting up, one computer at a time for one specific function. So we were able to show them you don't have to do that. You can put up a computer that can run, thousands of applications at once and just keep building on that. Right. And then for the sensor companies that were there, we were just showing them a new and better way to build and roll out their applications. And so we had tremendous response.
Fantastic. And do you have plans to attend other events throughout the remainder of the year? Like, what's on the agenda?
Yeah, so we're going to be at Edge Compute World and in Silicon Valley here in a couple weeks. Okay. We're really excited about that. That's almost a whole different kind of core platform group versus specific sector like transportation safety and whatnot. But we're going to be there, and we're going to have a booth, and we're going to be out there with Sasquatch taking pictures with people and having fun.
Fantastic. Well, Benjamin and Delano, thank you both so much for taking the time here. It's I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since we got scheduled. I think not only what you have going on is very, very important and in a very prime spot in the contributing to the growth of this industry and the adoption of solutions, but the knowledge you're able to share, I think, is going to be very helpful for our audience. So I wanted to thank you both for your time today. And I look forward to hopefully creating more content in the future. And I think our audience is getting a lot of value out of this.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You as well. Thank you both. All right, everyone. Thanks again for watching that episode of the IoT For All podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please click the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to hit the bell notification so you get the latest episodes as soon as they become available. Other than that, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.